Welcome to this focused Lunchbox webinar on how to successfully implement ERP software no matter what size your business is. My name is Courtney and I'm your host for today. Joining me is Heather Jones and Renee Dodds as subject matter experts for this webinar series. If you're following the webinar series with your ERP change project, you've prepared for and selected your ERP software and partner. Now it's time to implement your ERP. We know that this phase can be the most intimidating, but we're here to show you why it doesn't have to be. As Heather will mention, this is split into two webinars to ensure we're giving you the full picture. Everyone who is registered for this webinar will be automatically registered for the next one. So please keep an eye out for the confirmation in your inbox. I would now like to introduce Heather Jones, our Christchurch-based account manager. Over to you, Heather.
Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to those joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those who attended our previous webinars in this series. In those webinars, we've discussed how to prepare for an ERP evaluation and how to choose the right software along with the best partner for your organisation. Generally, these topics fall under the broad heading of pre-sales phase. And after this phase, we move to the implementation phase, which is the subject of this webinar. There is a lot of material to cover, so we will run two webinars on this phase. And in the next webinar, we will discuss how to get the most out of your ERP after the initial implementation has been completed. So the pre-sales phase would usually be concluded by signing some paperwork and committing to moving ahead with an ERP installation. At this point, your team will have a general understanding of the software capabilities, but the single most important thing that will ensure you have a successful implementation happens right now in the process as you engage with the software consultancy team and begin to frame up the plan for exactly what you want in your new system. We call this implementation scoping, and this phase is where we map out exactly what will be delivered from the partner to you, the customer. At Focus, we're used to dealing with a range of customers, right from the small 1 to 2 user company to the large Tier 2 businesses. And Renee Dodds, as one of our software consultants, perhaps you can respond to the common question and if there can be a one-size-fits-all approach to an ERP implementation.
Hello everyone, and yeah, good question, Heather. No, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach, simply because, as we've mentioned in our previous webinars, no two companies are the same. So that is still a factor when we start talking about implementing the ERP software.
Okay, so definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach. So then what sort of approach can you suggest to ensure a successful transition and software deployment?
Well, in today's webinar, we will be discussing what we consider to be the best practice implementation methodology. That's a mouthful, isn't it? However, it does assume that there are sufficient resources available on the customer side to spend time on their implementation.
And you're saying that's not always the case?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. When it comes to smaller customers, it can be common to hear that they don't have the same resources available compared to the larger customers. And because for smaller companies, you don't have the same segregation of duties that you may have within larger companies, you may find that the users of the software in those small businesses perform a range of different functions within the software, and therefore they may find changing to a new software system more difficult than most.
So if we're just concentrating on these small customers for the time being, what's the suggested approach to implementing the ERP system?
Well, before we even get into the implementation, if you're a smaller customer, then there may be a need to scale back some of your original ambitions. With enough time and money, an ERP system can be made to do just about anything, but the reality is that customers have neither unlimited time nor money. So the practical outcome of this is that they may not get every item on their wish list included in that initial installation.
Now when you say initial installation, this is an important point because it speaks to an ERP system as being a dynamic system as opposed to a static system.
Yeah, that's right. So by now you've identified your must-haves and you need to ensure that those are catered for in your initial installation. And then over time, you can engage with the ERP partner to adapt the system so that it caters for all your other needs. As we previously mentioned, you need to approach the solution with a long-term mindset. You may not have everything you want from the outset, but over time, you can continue to grow the solution to accommodate those additional nice-to-have items.
And with this initial installation, it's probably important with smaller customers than it is with larger sized companies. When dealing with these smaller sized companies, I often hear contain the need.
Yes, container needs. So that's a great philosophy for smaller customers. It doesn't mean that over time you can't realise the full scale of your ERP ambitions, but it does mean that in the short term, you should try to keep things relatively simple.
Okay, and what does keeping things relatively simple actually look like?
Well, one approach is to identify what you're currently doing in your day-to-day processes. And when you install your new ERP software, you try and keep things as close as possible to what you're used to. Then once you're up and running and have got used to the system, this could be in 4 to 6 months' time, you can then re-engage with your partner to build out some of the other functionality.
So it's introducing change in smaller increments that may be the case with larger organisations who can actually afford and dedicate time and resource to a full change management process.
Yep, that's it exactly, introducing change in small increments.
Okay, so switching focus from the smaller companies to a larger style customer, what recommendations can you provide as to the best practice when it comes to installing the ERP system?
Well, in the last webinar, we spoke about how important it was to ensure that a partner had an implementation methodology, although we didn't really go into the reasons why. So we'll expand a little bit on that now. Without an implementation methodology, you're basically building a house without any plans. And as we mentioned before, there are a lot of moving parts inside an ERP implementation. A number of stakeholders to manage, a lot of different types of works to be done. And without a plan, you have a recipe for a challenging project. At the same time, generally, the more you do something, the easier it becomes. So for a partner, this translates into the more times they follow a particular methodology, the better they become at it. And in general, the better the implementation experience should be for everyone.
All right, so perhaps you can explain, Renee, when we know that no two implementations are the same, how can a standard implementation approach deliver consistency when every implementation is different?
Yeah, well, the fact that remains, yes, no two implementations are the same, and that is why a methodology needs to be flexible. However, the fundamentals are that even though the individual company requirements may vary, the steps they need to go through to implement the solution are pretty standard across the board.
Okay, so what are these steps that a company will go through during the implementation?
I'll come to that shortly, Heather, but firstly, I just want to talk about some of the people that the clients may meet during this phase of the project. The first role you will hear about and will generally be your primary contact is the project manager from the partner. Now, the responsibility of the project manager is making sure that the project stays on track. They identify any issues that may disrupt the project, and they organise the partner's team to deliver the work that needs to be done. But it's also beneficial for you as the client to have a project manager. We've mentioned many times in the series so far that to have a successful project, you need to be involved. You can't just sit back and be a spectator. So just as the partner needs to rally the troops and get the work done, so do you. We spoke in the first webinar about your implementation team and identifying a champion that would be the central person for the project. And it's this person that should ideally fill the role of your project manager.
I can't agree more, Renee. The role of the project manager is a key person in the implementation, and they are there to ensure that the project is always moving in the right direction. Now, we spoke earlier about containing the need, and it really falls on the project manager at times to make the tough decisions and have the conversation about what should be done in the initial deployment and what should ideally be done later. Or, if there are new requirements that arise, clearly communicate this with the customer as to what impact their inclusion will have on the overall cost of the project, as well as, quite importantly, the timeline of the project. So, Renee, what other people can a client expect to be involved in the project?
Well, a second key role is the lead consultant, who is really the specialist in the system. And depending on the size of the implementation and the solution, there may also be multiple secondary consultants who will specialise in different aspects. They will be the people who will get to know your requirements. They will determine how the system should be configured, and it'll be the lead consultant that will be involved in the implementation the whole way through.
I think it's probably true to say that the team involved in the deployment, both the customer's team and the partner's team, are the people who really get to know the new system and the business processes inside and out. So are there any other roles we need to be aware of, Renee?
Yes, there's one more very important role, and that's the role of the project sponsor. This role should be someone fairly senior in both the partner organisation and within your organisation who can provide oversight to the project. They are there to monitor the project and make key and sometimes tough decisions when necessary.
So these roles all seem important, but at the same time, it does seem like there's a lot of people involved.
Well, this is where we come back to the fact that no two implementations are the same. So as we've mentioned, the roles are important and someone from both organisations should be filling those roles. However, it is not uncommon for a person to wear multiple hats. I've done implementations where I've been the project manager, the lead consultant and the consultant all wrapped into one. It really does come down to the size of the system and the implementation that will determine how many people are actually involved. In terms of wearing multiple hats, there's just one thing I would recommend, and that would be that the person taking on the role of the project sponsor should not be involved in the day-to-day tasks of the project. The project sponsor really needs to be slightly detached from the project so that they can see the wood from the trees when they're reviewing the status of where the project's at.
Okay, so they're the different roles within an ERP implementation phase, and we mentioned just before about the different stages of the actual project. Shall we talk about those stages in a wee bit more detail now?
Sure. So there are a number of phases in an implementation project. However, the first phase of the project overall is the pre-sales, and we've talked about that earlier in our previous two webinars. So our focus now will be on the remaining phases, and these are the solution engagement, the project planning and organisation, solution build, systems customization, solution delivery, prep and the go live, and then the final phase is the solution handover.
Okay, listeners, don't panic. We're not going to fit all of that into this webinar today. So we'll be taking things as far as the system customization phase, and then we'll cover off the balance of the phases in the next webinar. Renee, can we talk a bit more detail about each phase, perhaps what is involved in it, where it starts off, and what the outcome and deliverables of each phase are?
Okay, so the solution engagement phase, up until this time, as we said, we've been in the pre-sales phase dealing with the members of the sales team from the partner. Now that the solution has been chosen, generally there's a handover from the sales team to the project team who will be responsible for designing, planning and implementing the solution. And within this phase, there are some key steps that need to be carried out. The first one is starting off with the project kickoff meeting and finishing with the sign off of the final documentation, which outlines what is to be covered in the implementation project.
So that seems like a lot of steps and phases. I'm concerned with people listening are going to be thinking, what are we signing ourselves up for? How long is all of this going to take?
I can understand that, but the intention is not to scare people off. At the same time, we just want to be realistic and let them know what they will be going through. It does sound a lot, but just keep in mind that this is the foundation of the project, and we all know that good foundations make for good projects.
All right then, so with the kickoff meeting, can you go over what will happen in that meeting?
Sure. So the kickoff meeting is the formal handover from the sales team to the projects team, where the sales team outline the client's requirements of what has been discussed in the sales process. In terms of who is involved in this meeting, from the partner side, it would be the salesperson and the person or the people who did the demo, as well as the project manager and the lead consultants who will be carrying out the implementation. From the client side, it needs to be the project sponsor and the manager and any other key staff that you feel may be required. As part of the meeting, the lead consultant or the project manager will go through the project requirements questionnaire along with an outline of the project plan, steps and phases. You will then be left with some homework, being the questionnaire to work through.
Great. So what does this questionnaire cover?
Well, the questionnaire is a document that consolidates the work done in the preparation phase. It will ask you why you're wanting to do the project, what are you looking to achieve, and ultimately what a successful project will look like for you. Now, as we outlined in the first webinar, you need to be specific about your objectives. This document also covers the scale of the project, and this is more than just implementing the solution. This document will clarify exactly what is going to be covered. For example, you may not want to implement a certain division of the company, or you may only want to implement certain features to start with and then roll out the remainder later. All this needs to be clearly defined by you, as it will impact on the investment required for the project.
All right, so along with identifying the licensing requirements for the software, how and where the software is going to be deployed if it is not cloud-based, the implementation investment is generally based on the time that the partner consultants are expecting they need to actually deploy the software to meet the deliverables agreed upon in this initial deployment phase. So the more time spent here generally does mean the greater the investment. Can you tell me perhaps what are some of the areas of the project that can have an impact on the time taken, but that the customer might have the ability to influence, potentially to reduce the initial spend required and perhaps align it more closely with an expected return on investment?
Well, that's a good question, Heather. So, firstly, customization. So, in the last webinar, you discussed the difference between configuration and customization using the analogy of a spec house versus a custom design house. So, ERP packages in general provide the ability to be customized, and in some circumstances, it is absolutely beneficial to do so. However, customizations do add cost, and as such, it's worthwhile just to explore the option of whether your business can adapt to the software as opposed to immediately trying to adapt the software to your business.
Absolutely. And with an open mind and thinking about how processes are done, you could potentially save yourself a lot of money. We will discuss customizations in greater detail in the next webinar, but is there anything else that the customer has a choice about?
Yes, so the second area where they have choices around data conversion. This is where the data or the information from your current system is taken, cleaned up, and converted into a format that can then be brought into the new system. There are three types of data that are generally brought in. There's the master data, which is your key information, such as your customer, supplier details, and inventory records. There's opening balances from your GL, there's opening sales orders and purchase orders, and then there's the transactional history. Out of these three items, the first two are crucial and the lead consultant will discuss when it comes time to do so, the cutover plan for moving from the old system to the new system.
Okay, so when we look at the transactional history, we know that most ERP systems are capable of bringing in as much information as you want, but it's important to realise this can add cost depending on the extent of the history and quite often the quality of that data if you really are going to bring this into the new system. So Renee, is there anything else that this questionnaire is going to be covering?
Yeah, and the other key item that's covered in the questionnaire is training and how it is going to be delivered. So generally there are two approaches to training. First one is when the implementation partner holds a workshop, trains all your staff on the new system. And secondly, where the lead consultant trains a few staff members who then in turn are able to train the rest of the people in your company. From my experience with the implementations, I found training a few key staff who then in turn train the rest of the company is a far better approach. And this is because these staff members are able to talk to the rest of the staff in a language they understand, they use correct industry and company terms, and they use better practical everyday examples.
All right, just while we're talking about training, Renee, another point I'd like to make is that an ERP system can be great, well, is great, but if you don't actually know how to use it, then you're not going to achieve the benefits or the return on investment that you're looking for. So generally, when trying to trim implementation costs, one of those first items trimmed is often training. And this can be a mistake, as it really is a key investment at this point to ensure that you get the best out of your solution by actually spending the money now on training. I think sometimes the reason people trim the training budget is based on the premise that if software is designed well, then the staff should be able to pick it up and use it easily and not actually need a lot of training. What are your thoughts on that, Renee?
Well, ERP solutions have a lot of features, and the way things are done earlier on in a transaction may impact on how the transaction can be finished. So I suppose unless they're prepared to spend a lot of time trial and error and getting extremely frustrated, it's definitely worthwhile taking the time to get the training. Another point to remember is that also due to required transaction controls to meet audit and legal requirements, it is generally easier to enter a transaction into a system than to try and remove a transaction.
Okay, so this point about the required controls inside an ERP system, it's certainly something that we've found with some smaller companies that make the move from a small business accounting package to an ERP system. They actually find the system to be less flexible than the previous accounting package. There are good reasons behind this, and that is because the ERP solution has to have a lot more controls built into it than what a basic accounting package will need. An ERP system has to cater for more detailed auditing and generally more people using the system, and therefore must have controls built into it that can meet these demands. So Renee, after the completion of the project kickoff meeting and the questionnaire, what is the next step in the process?
So the next step is to go through the current business process mapping. This is really indicating how your business currently works and essentially documenting what you went through in the prep for the implementation when you got to know your business. The purpose of doing this is so that the implementation consultant can understand how your business operates and leads to the next step where they're able to outline the gaps between your current processes and how the software operates.
Okay, that might cause some concern for our listeners. If you've done all this work reviewing your systems and now you find out there's some gaps in your processes.
So just because there are gaps, that doesn't necessarily mean there is a problem. It just means that something is a bit different. It may be that the way you're currently doing something to achieve a particular outcome could be done more effectively or efficiently in the new system.
Indeed. So with the questionnaire, the process mapping and the gap analysis complete, would you be now ready to start your implementation?
So the object of what we're working towards is to define what the implementation consists of. It's easy to say, and we often hear, I want the software installed, but it's important to be clear on exactly what that means. So all this work that has been done up until now leads us to the scope document, which is a document that outlines what is going to be done in the project. This document defines what configuration work needs to be carried out, what customizations may be required, how long the project's going to take, and will identify any potential risks associated to the project and who the project team is. So this document you need to ensure you review and understand, as this is what's going to be delivered as your implementation.
Fantastic. And from my experience, the initial scoping is that one key thing that I mentioned at the start of this webinar that I believe is really critical to any successful implementation, and of course the ongoing relationship between the partner and the client. It's vital that both parties agree and understand the document inside and out. It really can't be too technical. The client has to understand it. It's not actually a technical scoping document. So from the customer's perspective, it needs to clearly lay out what the software will do at go live. And from the partner's perspective, exactly what the customer requires and how they need the system to operate. The scoping document will have clarified what is included for the deployment, and it will include time estimates, license requirements, and will have identified if there are any hardware or environmental requirements for the software to be installed upon. It's only at this point that the customer will really start to get a firmer indication of the costs relating to the project. Depending on the software, the licensing may be an upfront purchase or a monthly user fee, which is typical of cloud-based software running the software as a service model. The labour consultancy costs from the partner can be invoiced in a few ways, and often finance is offered. Perhaps, Renee, you can outline the common options when you're purchasing an ERP system.
Sure. So once the estimate is defined, then depending on the size of the implementation, there are a couple of ways the project could be invoiced. For large projects, you may have project payments that are generally based on achieving specific milestones within the project. The partner's project team will expect you to sign off when the milestones are achieved, which will then generally lead to a milestone invoice. For a smaller implementation, you may find you just get invoiced monthly based on the progress of the project. The details of the project payment schedule will be outlined in your project plan.
All right, I think it's probably worthwhile at this point to introduce the subject of fixed cost implementations, and that I do get asked this a lot. Can we have a fixed price implementation? Just how much will it cost? But we know partners are reluctant to give these. So in my experience, customers can object to this non-fixed cost implementation, and basically that's because they are afraid of budget blowouts, afraid the implementation will go on forever and that they will be charged all the way. And in essence, they don't want to be seen as an open checkbook. But the thing is, this open checkbook can cut both ways. So just as the customer doesn't want to be in the situation where the project is going way over budget, the implementing partner also doesn't want to find themselves in a situation where they're doing hundreds of hours of unpaid work, which is why it can be difficult to lock down all the implementation costs up front. Even something as simple as a key staff member leaving can actually cause unforeseen additional costs.
Yeah, that's true, Heather. And so the aim of this webinar series is to help prospective customers enter into an ERP implementation as prepared as they possibly can be. But the fact remains that things crop up during the implementation that neither the customer nor the partner were aware of prior to the commencement, and that these things do have an effect on costs.
Yes, and as an account manager, I'm all too aware that billing is one of those potential areas of contention in an ERP implementation. And quite often, this is simply due to the difference in understanding of what a milestone should incorporate. So for example, the partner believes they have done everything to complete the milestone, yet as the client, you may feel some items are missing.
Yes, and this is where the relationship, which we've spoken about right back at the start around choosing your partner, this is where that relationship comes in extremely importantly, because if you've got a good relationship, you'll be able to have the discussion and be able to work through those issues together.
So Renee, that takes us to the end of the first phase of the project as we start moving into the second phase, which is project planning and organisation. Can you tell us more about this phase?
Yeah, so the first phase of the project that we've been discussing is about what is going to be done as part of the project. The second phase relates to how it's going to get done. So some of the activities that are initiated during this phase continue for the remainder of the implementation project. Some of the key items that are the focus here are items such as the project plan, project meetings, and change management.
Okay, we've mentioned the project plan several times. Can you outline what this is exactly?
Yeah, so the project plan is the playbook for the project. It outlines what needs to be done, when it needs to be done by, and who is responsible for doing it. It is crucial to the project as everyone needs to ensure that their teams are available to do the work in the time frame specified. You need to take into account factors such as month end, year end, staff leave, and all those other factors that may impact on the availability of your staff. The project plan is also key to identifying what will happen if something is done late and should also include the all-important payment schedule. It's important to remember that the project plan is a living document, so it should be updated on a regular basis, generally by the project manager from the partner, and it'll indicate any areas of concern.
Oh, that's a good point. I've seen project plans that are built at the start of the project and then never seen again. It is important to ensure that they are maintained and updated. And you also mentioned project meetings. Again, can you outline the sort of things we will be covering off in those project meetings?
So project meetings are important to ensure that once you have everyone on the bus, that your bus is going in the direction that everybody wants. There are a couple of meetings that should happen, but one of the key meetings are the project team meetings. These happen fairly frequently and are a forum for the project managers to be made aware of the progress of tasks that people are working on. It's also the forum for people working on the task to raise any potential issues, and most importantly, whether they are comfortable that the work will be completed on time.
All right, so what about the project sponsors? When do they get project updates?
Okay, so that happens in the steering committee meeting. So these meetings should be at least fortnightly. They need to involve the project sponsor, the project managers, the lead consultant, and any other key people. These meetings are for updating the project sponsor on how the project is progressing. It's there that you make them aware of the risks, get feedback on any tough questions that may need to be answered, and updating the budget so that everyone knows how things are tracking financially.
Yes, and it's true to say that when there are issues in the project, frequently it is due to those project sponsor meetings not happening. So when we're putting in a new ERP solution, it really is a big change for most companies, which obviously has an impact on a great deal of people within both organisations actually. What suggestions do you have in regarding managing this change?
It is a big change for companies, and I suppose acknowledging that fact is a good starting point. In terms of suggestions of what can be done, well, a lot of those suggestions are items that we've been covering off through the course of this webinar series. Get people involved in the project and keep talking to them about what is happening. Don't just restrict the updates to the staff on the project team, but let everyone know how things are progressing. And in that way, they will all feel part of the process.
Okay, so with our planning and documentation done, are we ready to start now on phase 3?
Yes, we are. Now we're ready to get into the detail of the project, the solution build. So this is where the consultants start building up the system based on all your requirement documents that have been outlined. During the setup of the system, as mentioned, the consultants are more than likely working remotely, setting up and configuring the new solution. This is the time where there's not necessarily a whole lot for you to do, except looking at the demo system that they may have provided. Once the setup has been done, there's generally a full review of the solution with the consultants and your team to weed out any changes required, but also to help get the champions up to speed on the new product and start preparing and understanding the new business processes that will be used in your company.
That's exciting. So now we have the software to work with and start looking at who should get involved from the customer side of things at this stage.
Well, once that functional review has been carried out, which is generally a workshop, it is then time for the champions to start working through the new system, testing out the solution based on the requirements and test plans that the consultant should have provided to you. It's also worth at this stage starting to document your new business processes, which will help guide the training of the rest of the staff.
I have to agree. There really is benefit in your team taking the time to go through this mapping process, ensuring that they look at all the items which impact on the business process, which may be tasks that are carried out outside of the system as well. If you do that, you end up with a comprehensive guide on essentially how your business operates. It's also worthwhile pointing out that staff movement happens, so having such a guide can help a new person come into your business and pick up on what is required to do a lot more easily than if their workflows have actually been documented. Renee, what else is going on at this stage?
Well, another key activity that will be taking place is the data conversion, which we discussed earlier. So just remember to take the time to go through your data that has been brought into your system to ensure that you're bringing in quality data rather than any historical issues.
Oh, it's so easy to agree with you at the moment. Yes, you have a shiny new system here, and it's best not to tarnish it with historical issues. So now we have our system that's configured in the way that we need it to be configured. It has our data in it. Our champions have been testing it. We really should really be ready to get going and starting to use it now, surely?
Nearly, but not quite. There's still a customization phase. So this is a term we've spoken a bit about earlier. For the purposes of customization, I'm not going to refer to situations where you need to develop new functionality. I'm just referring to the customization of reports and form design. So let's just start with forms. Personally, I see forms as important to your business because they're a reflection and a representation of your business. So it's worthwhile to make sure that they look good, that they look professional, and that they represent your company image and brand. The other side is reporting, which refers to the internal reporting that comes from a system. With reports, my recommendation here is to identify the key information that you need and work with your consultants on how you can get to that information. But try and avoid, where possible, having custom reports written for your business immediately. Wait a few months if you can and get to know your system and get some good data in your new system, and then you'll be in a better place to understand what you need. Custom report writing is one of those areas that does take time, and hence it impacts on costs. But we will talk more detail about this in the next webinar.
Thanks, Renee. So this brings us to the end of the customization phase and also to the end of what we're going to cover in this webinar. Renee, can you give us a sneak peek into what we will be covering in the next webinar?
Yeah, sure. So in the next webinar, we will look at the final 3 elements of the implementation phase: the solution delivery, the prep and the go live, and then finally the solution handover phase. We will then also look at what comes after the implementation project. Is that it, or will there be more for your ERP journey?
Great stuff. Well, thank you for your time, everyone, and back to you, Courtney.
Thanks, Heather and Renee. The next and final webinar in the series is going to be all about how to get value out of your ERP system. I'm just going to check for any questions that have popped up during the webinar, but feel free to enter any questions in now if you haven't already. Okay, so we'll just wrap up the webinar now. So thank you to everyone for attending this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one. So keep an eye out for the event information that will come through to your inbox.